I am happy to talk to you about. I'm going to talk a little bit about Xerces, what we do, how we work, and then a little bit about my job in particular. So, figure out if I can share my screen. Okay, is that working? Or is it giving you it's the wrong version, right? Are you seeing my version or the like presenter view?
We're seeing your version.
Okay, let's see, there's a way. There we go. Better?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about my work with Xerces today. Um, so the Xerces Society is a nonprofit, and our goal is to protect biodiversity by protecting invertebrates and their habitats. Our name comes from the Xerces blue butterfly, which is this butterfly you see here. It's the first butterfly that we know of in the United States to go extinct from human activity. It used to live in the Bay Area. It declined due to habitat loss. So we have different programs. We have the endangered species team. I'm on that team. We have a pollinator team and a pesticide team. Those are sort of our major programs. We're a nonprofit, so we're not a government agency, and that means that all of the money that we generate through donations or grants get plugged back into the mission rather than paying out like shareholders or CEOs. You might wonder, why are we focused on invertebrates? Because invertebrates in general are not particularly beloved by the public, but they're really important to our well-being. They're important to the environment. Over half of all the described species on the planet are insects, and then many of the other groups are different types of invertebrates, including like nematodes, mollusks, crustaceans, and so on. They fill all sorts of ecological roles. They're herbivores, predators, decomposers, nutrient cyclers. They do a lot of important stuff in our ecosystems. Now, you've probably heard about the biodiversity crisis that we're in. About 1 in 4 species on the planet is at some risk of extinction. These are some data from the IUCN Red List, which tracks extinction risk for species. And you can see here some different groups. So 40% of all amphibians are at some risk of extinction, about a third of all conifers, a third of all corals. A lot of different types of species have been examined, but we don't have as good of data for insects and other invertebrates, primarily just because there are so many insects. You know, there's like more species of beetles than there are species of plants. So we don't have the same survey data, but we do have more and more long-term studies out there that are showing that invertebrates and insects in particular are also at risk. So these are just a few examples from long-term studies. There's many of them, more coming out all the time. But a study of butterflies in Singapore showed that over the past 160 years, about half of the butterfly species that had existed in Singapore are now gone. A study in Germany, they looked at biomass of flying insects. So basically, they would catch the insects and weigh them to get biomass. And they found that over the past 27 years, the biomass, the total weight of the insects they collected, had declined 75% in just 3 decades. And this was in a protected, pristine area that we would expect to see fewer declines. Here in the Western US, a recent study looked at butterfly abundance, so the number of butterflies you find when you're out, and found that butterflies had declined at a rate of 1.6% a year for the last 40 years. So 1.6% doesn't seem like a lot, but over 4 decades, that's huge loss of butterfly abundance. And these losses were linked to warmer fall temperatures. So that's another thing we're seeing, is an increase, like fingerprints of climate change on these declines. There are many causes of insects declines, and they're all kind of acting in concert. So whenever we're talking about biodiversity loss of any type of organism, habitat loss is one of the big players, right? It's hard for species to persist if they have nowhere to exist. Pesticides are a big one, especially when it comes to insects. So many of the pesticides that we use, many of them are directed at insects, but others that are not directly targeted at insects, things like fungicides or herbicides, can still be have negative impacts on insects. Invasive species are important, especially invasive plants that reduce the abundance of important plants that insects needs. Pollination, pollution and disease are important, changes in land use management, and then, of course, climate change. And the effect of climate change is becoming more and more apparent. When somebody asks me why we should care about biodiversity declines, I think that there are moral and ethical reasons that we should care about the loss of these like incredible species that we share the planet with. But if you just want to look at it from in terms of pure self-interest, we should care about biodiversity because biodiversity provides us with ecosystem services. So ecosystem services are the supply of benefits from ecosystems to society that support human life and well-being. So these are the things that make life on this planet possible and even pleasant at times. So things like pollination. So much of the food that we eat, including many of the foods that provide us with important micronutrients, require pollinators, usually insects. Water filtration, so mussels are invertebrates, not insects, of course, but they keep our streams and waters clean. Nutrient cycling, things like this dung beetle that help nutrients cycle nutrients so that we can continue to grow food. And then there are what we call cultural services, which are sort of the intangible things like um, traveling to the coast to see monarch butterflies overwintering, or sort of aesthetic or spiritual services that invertebrates provide. And what scientists find over and over is that ecosystems with high biodiversity are better at consistently providing us with those ecosystem services over time than ecosystems with low biodiversity. And pollination is a great example of this. Everyone thinks about honeybees, but there's actually 1,600 species of bees here in California. And what scientists find is that pollination services are better when there are many species of bees than when there are only few species of bees. And this is something that we find over and over with many different types of ecosystem services, is that biodiversity is the key to those services. And we know that biodiversity and climate change are linked. The fight to protect biodiversity and the fight to address climate change are the same. And we have to address climate change if we want to protect biodiversity, and we need biodiversity to help us mitigate and adapt to climate change. So part of my role at Xerces, I'm on the endangered species team, but I'm also our climate lead. I what I try to do is think about how we can incorporate climate change into our work, thinking about what it means for creating habitat. How can we create habitat that's more resilient? How can we be thinking about protecting biodiversity while we're trying to mitigate climate change? And the things that we do or create habitat. So the more habitat there is, the more species are resilient to extinction risk, trying to mitigate those other stressors, those other causes of insect declines, things like avoiding pesticide use and reducing pesticide risk. Planting native plants. Many species of butterflies have evolved to use certain types of plants, and so making sure that we have those plants for them in the environment is important. Buying bee-safe plants is another thing. We find that a lot of the plants that you purchase from nurseries can have a lot of harmful pesticides in them. And then advocating for change. So these are just this is sort of a high-level overview of some of the things we think about when we're thinking about addressing these two issues of climate change and biodiversity loss. What do we do at Xerces? So we, as I said, we have our endangered species program. We do a lot of work on pollinators. We also do a lot of work to limit pesticide risk. We have a program that works on freshwater mussels. We have a new, sort of a newer program working on fireflies. I'm going to talk today about some of the work we do on Western monarchs as an example of of how Xerces works. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with monarch butterflies, with these beautiful butterflies, this amazing migration. The caterpillars or the larvae are specialists on milkweed, which you see here in this picture. So the caterpillars will only feed on milkweed leaves, but the adults will drink nectar from many different species of plants. And they're known for this amazing migration that they do. So the eastern monarchs, there's two populations, west and east. The eastern monarchs are the ones that most people are familiar with. They overwinter in central Mexico. They breed east of the Rockies and they make it all the way up to Canada before coming all the way back to Mexico. Western monarchs breed west of the Rocky Mountains and they overwinter along the California coast. And maybe some of you have seen some of the monarch groves along the coast, like Pismo Beach and Pacific Grove are some of the bigger ones. This is a picture of some of the monarchs clustering. So they form these clusters and it's an incredible sight. Um, What do monarchs need? We know that they need breeding habitat, which has flowers for nectar and milkweed for the caterpillars. The overwintering habitat needs trees that they can cluster in, and they need protection from storms and severe weather. So there is like a core group of trees that they cluster on, and then there's usually trees surrounding those clusters. They need reduced pesticides. We also need research to find out how to better help recover this species. So these are some data, and I think I'm just going to be focused on this graph here on the right. So Xerces and the National Park Foundation started the Western monarch count in 1997, where we actually go out and count monarchs in clusters all along the California coast. This blue line shows the number of sites surveyed. So over time, we surveyed more and more sites. The first year that we did this count was in 1997 when we counted 1.2 million monarchs along the coast. And then that number kind of dropped, got low around like 200,000 for several years. And then in 2018, it cratered. In 2020, there were less than 2,000 monarchs counted. It was the lowest count ever. And then 2024 and 2025 were the second and third lowest numbers with less than 10,000 and less than 13,000 monarchs along the coast. So over time, we've started seeing these big drops. And then you see the population rebounded a little bit and then dropped again. And that's one thing about insects is that their populations can bounce around a lot. So it can be bad news, but it can also mean that they have the capacity to recover and they could recover quickly given the right conditions. So what do we do to help recover the species? One of the things we do is through our community science initiatives. So we help get the data needed to improve management and protect these species. We have the Western monarch count, which gets the data I just showed you in that graph. So here are two volunteers counting monarch clusters and trees. We do a few of those counts during the winter. We have the Western Monarch Milkweed Mapper, which is another community science project. Now it's run through iNaturalist, but basically if people see monarchs or milkweed, they can record it and let us know. Because historically, the Eastern monarchs have been really well studied, but not the Western monarchs. And we didn't know a lot about what they were doing or where they were at different times of the year. And so this data was really necessary for conservation. We work with other scientists to answer important questions. So we've held some like workshops where we gather a bunch of scientists and agency folks to ask like, what do we need to know to protect the species? Like, what is the information that's missing? And one of the things that came out of that, oh, do you have a question?
Oh, great.
Oh, okay. Is this tagging project. So this is a little tag on the back of a monarch, and we've started tagging a few monarchs in the overwintering groves because we didn't know a lot about their behavior when they're overwintering. Are they moving from grove to grove? Are they just staying put? When do they leave? Are they leaving or are they dying? And so these data get us some really important information about how they're using the overwintering sites. How are they choosing the trees that they're roosting in? And that can translate into better management recommendations. We can say, okay, they're choosing these trees, they're not choosing these types of trees, or they do this when it's windy. And it just helps us make better decisions about how we can support the species. We do a lot of outreach and education. We work with people to protect pollinators where they work and live. So we will go out to farms or natural areas or school gardens and talk with people about how they can better create habitat or protect the habitat that they have. We do policy work, so we helped petition the monarch for listing under the Endangered Species Act. We petition species when we think it's warranted. We also do other policy work in terms of monarchs. We worked with senators to pass the Monarch and Pollinator Highway Act, which provided funding for departments of transportation to improve habitat along roadsides. And in some parts of the country, roadsides are the only places where you can find habitat. We work to develop and improve availability of important plants. So 10, 15 years ago, it was really hard to find California native milkweeds and for sale. So we worked with nurseries to do studies to figure out how to best establish and propagate those plants so that they could become more commercially available. And we've continued to expand that work. So sometimes we do seed collection, which is always fun to go out, find these plants, collect seeds, and propagation trials like you see here, like what is the best way to get these plants to grow so that we can establish populations that we can then sell so that nurseries can sell more milkweed. We can get more milkweed on the ground and other important plants. And then we create habitat. So we work with people all over the country to create habitat for monarchs and other pollinators. This is a school garden that was planted in Napa a couple years ago. This is a map that we worked with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on to look at where should we focus on putting habitat. So this light blue area, and we're here, is the priority one area. So this is the area where that first generation of monarchs breeds every year. And so that's where it's really important to do habitat. And so we have a lot of projects in that priority one area. We have a habitat kit program where we provide free native plants to people who want to create pollinator habitat throughout California. So we started this program in 2019 after the monarchs population crashed, and we realized our staff were already doing as much as we could. Like, how can we get more habitat in the ground? And we realized that there are a lot of people who want to create habitat, but maybe they don't have the funds for the plants or they don't know which plants to get. And so that was how we started this habitat kit program. And I'll talk about it a little bit more in a minute. These are just some of our happy habitat kit recipients over the years. It's a really fun program to work on. So that's a little bit like a brief overview of how we work. So we identify a species or a group that's in trouble and try to attack the problem from different angles, figuring out what does the species need, what's lacking, where are the gaps, do we need data, do we need habitat, do we need plants, and trying to figure out how to solve those problems. I'm going to talk a little bit now about what I do at Xerces, and first my background. So I wanted to be a scientist as long as I could remember. Like when I was 5, I wanted to be an astronomer. I wanted to be a paleontologist for a while. I briefly wanted to be a geologist, and then I settled on ecology because I love spending time outdoors, love being in nature. I cared about environmental issues, and that's where I landed, and I've been really happy. So my first job doing ecology was in Montana on Palouse Prairie on the National Bison Range, which is an amazing place. I got a research experience for undergrads. It's called an REU. So as an undergrad, they give you these opportunities to do an experiment, do field work. we were studying grasshoppers in these little cages here, and I loved it. And I love Montana. So that was a really great experience. I stayed and did a master's, and then I did a PhD. So I stayed in school for a long time. I did a PhD at Notre Dame and did my field research in the Upper Peninsula, Michigan's Upper Peninsula on the Michigan-Wisconsin border in old fields. And I was looking at how temperature effects could affect grasshopper spider predator prey interactions. So I would like heat up some cages and cool down some cages and then see what happened. After that, I went to Kansas and worked on the Kanza Prairie, which is one of my favorite places in the whole world. So if you're ever on a road trip driving through Kansas, stop in Manhattan, go see Kanza. There's like a 4 mile hike you can do. It's wonderful. There's bison. It's beautiful rolling prairie. Here's one of my good friends, Jesus, and we were sweep netting for grasshoppers. So I did more work on temperature effects on community dynamics among invertebrates there. It was really great. And then I went to University of Houston, where I did some research on coastal prairie, which is completely different type of grassland. It was super weird. There are lots of crayfish there, and they build all these tunnels, so there's little crayfish chimneys everywhere. But a really neat ecosystem. There's a lot of really cool grasslands in the southeastern part of the U.S. But at this time, so I thought I wanted to be a scientist. I thought I wanted to stay in academia. That had been my goal, but I just got really burned out. I didn't want to do it anymore. It's just there's not a lot of jobs. Um, you're expected to work all the time. I was burned out. I didn't want to do it anymore. And so I started looking for other opportunities. And that's how I ended up here in Sacramento. I applied for a job at the Xerces Society and got it. And it's been great. So I've been at Xerces for about 8 years. And I really like it. I wanted to work in an organization where it was still like centering science because that was important to me, but also I wanted to do more conservation or like hands-on work, and so that is what led me to Xerces. So part of my job is running the Habitat Kit program. So I run it with Jessa as the woman here on the right. Isis on the left, she runs our community science monarch programs. So we're just starting year 8 of this program. We've given away almost 300,000 plants across the state for over 800 projects. And it's just a really inspiring project to work on because there's so many great people out there and they care and they're trying to do something. They're trying to make a difference. And it's just a really rewarding part of my job that I really enjoy. I get to sometimes go around and visit some of the different projects and see what people are doing and give advice. Um, it's really fun. I also work with a few other different groups. So I'm working with SMUD, which is our local utility company, to add pollinator habitat to some of their solar arrays. So this is a photo of a hedgerow we planted. So we're working on creating more habitat, creating habitat under the panels so that the way we produce energy can also provide habitat for wildlife. I've also been working with departments of transportation. So one of my coworkers, Jenny, and I wrote a series of guidebooks for departments of transportation who want to create pollinator habitat on roadsides. And now we're working on some workshops. We're going to be going to different places around the country and doing some trainings with different Department of Transportation staff. And occasionally I get to do field work. So in my academic life, I was doing field work every summer, all summer. I was in the field every day. I don't do as much field work anymore, but sometimes I do get to do a little bit. So this is with two volunteers who are helping me do some bumblebee surveys at Cronin Ranch, which isn't too far from here. I have gotten to do a few bumblebee surveys as part of my work. Sometimes I do pollinator monitoring or plant monitoring in some of the places where I do habitat. One of our staff members is doing butterfly surveys on BLM land, and I got to go out with him for a week. So it's not a big part of my job, but it is something that I get to do sometimes. And that's pretty much it. So just a brief overview of what I do and what Xerces does. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
That was really informative. I definitely have a few questions, but I want to
Okay, good.
encourage the students to speak up and
And
ask questions if they have any.
Atlas told me that they helped plant some of our habitat kits, so you can ask them about um, that also.
I have a question if I'm allowed to
Yeah.
ask. So I know like there are a ton of species that are going endangered, but specifically I know like there are like bugs, mammals. Out of those like types of species, which do you think is the most important to protect?
Uh, I don't even know. I think that I think that insects and small things get overlooked. Um, they're not as charismatic as like a polar bear. Um, it's hard to say that one species is more important than another, but I do think that the good news is when you protect habitat for one species, like when you protect habitat for monarchs, you're gonna create habitat that's gonna be beneficial for lots of species. And so I think that if we can address these root causes like habitat loss and climate change, which is like a big, it's a big thing to do, but I think that that will benefit many, many species. So that's a way of ducking your question, but
Thank you.
To jump on that question as well. I in Sacramento specifically, I feel like oak habitats have been particularly endangered,
Mhm.
especially like for example with the Coyote Creek agrivoltaic project.
Yeah.
Um, so that is like one of the final biodiversity hotspots in the Sacramento region. And we talked a little bit about oak trees during our traditional ecological knowledge
Mm-hmm.
session, but oak trees host like hundreds of species. So like when we're taking out oak tree habitats, we're not just taking out the trees, we're also impacting the living place of all of these different species, not just insects, but
Right.
also owls and lots of other creatures too. So um, yeah, just piggybacking off of what Angela said about habitat loss being like a huge issue.
Hmm.
If you haven't heard about the Coyote Creek agrivoltaic project, I definitely encourage you to look into it. There's a lot of local organizations that are doing everything they can to stop it from happening.
Yeah. And I'll just add to that, oak trees are host plants for hundreds of species of butterflies and moths. So they're really important for pollinators. And a lot of the introduced, so non-native trees that are maybe attractive, and we often see like ginkgos or crepe myrtle, because they haven't evolved here with the local butterflies, there are very few species, and in case of ginkgos, there are no species in the U.S. that use them as host plants. So just thinking about that aspect of it, like it's habitat and biodiversity combined.
Students.
Sorry. For the, because you were talking about policy as well.
Hmm.
Is there like any specific policy that you'd like to see passed, like in California to protect biodiversity?
I think that California, Xerces is a national organization, so I sometimes feel very lucky to be in California because we've got staff in other states that are not doing as much. Um, California has that 30 by 30 initiative. I would like to see that focusing. I would like to see some of those initiatives focus on habitat connectivity and biodiversity as much on just like a ticking off acres, I guess. Um, and I think that there's more we could do to encourage people to use fewer pesticides. I think that most people think about pesticides and they think of, well, it's a problem in farmland, but there's actually can be just as high amount of pesticides used in urban areas around our homes, and it's usually not being used for for economic reasons, like people spray around their homes because they think that that's the responsible thing to do, right? They're just trying to do what's best. But I think, but a lot of times it's not necessary and it's harmful to insects, which means there's less food for birds. And so I think that there's more we could do to encourage reduce pesticide use where there's not an economic reason for it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And students? We have a question in the chat. Says, I saw you worked with PG&E to help pollinators, but have you or the Xerces Society worked with farmers and local agriculture?
Yeah. So that project I did, it was with SMUD. Sometimes, um, yeah. So most of our pollinator team works with agriculture all the time. So we have several staff in California and around the country that work with farmers every day. So they work with farmers to add pollinator habitat. We do a lot of hedgerows, which are large plantings of like shrubs that are like long linear plantings. But as we're doing that, we're always trying to think about what are the pesticide risks? How can we put this in a place where it will be safe for pollinators? So my job doesn't, I don't work a lot with ag, but many of my coworkers do work almost exclusively with farmers and ranchers.
Just to piggyback off that question, have you worked with the Center for Land-Based Learning or anyone at Xerces Society? Okay, I thought so.
Not me, but some of our other staff, sometimes on petitions or other policy or other work. Yeah.
Looks like we have another question in the chat. Does Xerces Society work with any lobbying groups to push legislators to pass bills that help address the issues you talked about today?
Sometimes. So in the past, we haven't done much lobbying, and it's something very new. Like we just hired a new policy person whose job it is to identify places where we can have impacts on policy. Many states don't allow their state fish and wildlife. I shouldn't say many, but there's like 8 states that don't give their state fish and wildlife services authority to do conservation work on insects. Like they're only allowed to work on vertebrates. And so we have been pushing to get those laws changed in those states. So one is Nevada, one is Colorado just changed it. So we have been doing some lobbying work there, but to date, that is not where we have put a lot of effort. But it's something we've been thinking more and more about.
I'll ask my question now, and then if any students want to jump in, because I have multiple questions, so
Sure.
interrupt me at any time. My first question is, do you notice that the monarchs have a preference for any species of milkweed between each other? Like I know there's like 15 or so California native species of milkweed. I'm curious if any of them are more popular than others.
There are a few studies looking at ranked preference, and I know that some of the ones that are less available, like Asclepias erosa, is one that I've noticed that they don't use. There are some studies, and I don't remember for sure. I think they use the speciosa, so showy milkweed and narrowleaf milkweed are pretty popular. I'm not sure about all of the other things, but if you are really interested, I could probably dig up a paper for you.
I am definitely interested, but luckily, all of the like native planting projects that I've done, we have focused on showy milkweed and narrowleaf milkweed, so that works out pretty well.
They use both of those, and those are the two that are most commercially available. We've been trying to work to expand the availability of California milkweed, which is one of an early emerging species. So the idea is that, well, what seems to be happening is that monarchs are leaving the overwintering sites earlier as it's warming up. So this is an effect of climate change, but the milkweed doesn't seem to be emerging earlier. So if we can we've been trying to do seed collection and propagation to get more California milkweed out there because at least that species emerges early. So the monarchs are out looking for places to lay their eggs. Maybe there's you try and get those early emerging species more available in the environment, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so it sounds like just the change in weather and like long-term climate is also impacting when the native plants are coming up. So it's negatively impacting the monarchs' migration.
Yeah, it's affecting when the monarchs are leaving, and then it's creating a mismatch because I don't think that the milkweed doesn't seem to be advancing when they're emerging, but the monarchs are leaving earlier. And then the other piece of that is that as we get more storms or we're getting more atmospheric rivers and whatnot, can harm the monarchs when they're in their overwintering sites. So leading to more mortality. One of the things we don't know is how fire is affecting monarchs, if all the smoke is affecting their migration, is it affecting survival? And that, of course, is becoming more prevalent with climate change.
That's interesting. Um, I I've done a lot of like hiking around Mount Lassen and like old burn sites there, and there was a year where I guess it was like late winter, early spring, and we just happened upon this massive monarch breeding ground there and like on a burn site.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
so I don't know, maybe I should report that to iNaturalist. I probably should have done it
Yeah.
then.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because that is a species that likes disturbance. And so maybe the milkweed, I mean, not monarchs, so maybe the fire helped reduce competition or something, the milkweed.
Um, do the students have any other questions before I continue yapping about my special interests here? Okay, I'm seeing people shake their head no. I do have another question. I know you mentioned that you launched the roadside kits, and I've read that the increase of cars has been one of the largest contributors to the loss of insects. So I'm curious if the roadside kits, if you're seeing like a large impact, like
Interesting.
beneficial impact in the roadside kits.
I So I have not seen that. I do know that there is, people call it the windshield effect. So, and maybe that's what you're thinking of, but maybe not. So back when I was a kid, which was a long time before you guys were born, you would drive somewhere and your windshield would be covered with dead bugs. And now that doesn't happen anymore because there just aren't as many insects. But I think the leading causes are things like habitat loss and climate change, pesticide use, like those big ones. In terms of roadside habitat, there we do encourage it like in areas like not in the median, but on the sides of the road. And the data that we have is that some butterflies or bees would be killed by car collisions, but for the most part, they stay along the side of the road and it's like a little roadway for them. In parts of the country, like think about like the plain states, places like when I lived in Kansas or Iowa, in a lot of places where it's just agriculture, like cornfields, like from edge to edge, there isn't any habitat. And so the roadside, it's not great. Like I'd rather be in like Yosemite or a national wildlife refuge. So it's like marginal habitat. But the idea is that like at least in some places, marginal habitat is better than no habitat. And if you can create good habitat, they tend to stay in it more than if it's marginal and then they're moving around trying to find better places. So that's the idea, or that's part of the thinking behind the roadsides. Also, there are like millions of acres in the US represented by roadsides. So if we can improve that to make it a little bit better for our pollinators, maybe we can help support our pollinators better. Um, than if we're not doing it just because there's so many degraded habitats, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah, absolutely. And I was thinking of the windshield effect, so thank you for that
Yeah,
correction.
yeah.
I want to give the young climate champions one last chance to ask a final question. any thoughts? And if not, I'll just ask another one. And maybe I should just email you other extra questions. Um, okay.
I have
Oh,
one.
oh,
Uh, I
please.
want I wanted to ask what you think the most fulfilling part of your job is. Like what motivates you each day to like go to work and continue doing what you do.
I think it's I think the Habitat Kit program has been really fulfilling just because sometimes I get pretty down about the state of the world today, the state of this country. And then we get like hundreds of applications of people who are just trying to make something better in their own community and they care and they're taking action. And so that to me is really inspiring and reminds me that, you know, there's still a lot of good stuff happening. And then just looking at the impact, like we've created a ton of habitat and that habitat is supporting pollinators and monarchs. It's getting other people inspired. Like we have a lot of schools that get our habitat kits. So those are kids who are spending time outside and that's important to creating like an interest and a love for nature. And so I think that's probably a lot of it. I have really great coworkers. A lot of my work is collaborative. I often have to work with other people on writing projects or outreach or things like that. And it's just a really good group of people that I get to work with. It's also nice.
Thank you.
It looks like we got quite a few questions in the chat. They're all sort of similar topic. Folks are looking for opportunities to work with Xerces, whether that's volunteering or paid opportunities for young folks.
So we have 2 art internships coming up. We don't often have internships. We're kind of on the smaller side, and so we don't have a lot of that yet. But we had 2 great artists who interned with us last year, and we're going to do that again. And they helped create like different scientific um, illustrations for different things that we're doing, which was really cool. Sometimes we have volunteer events. So we have the Monarch Overwintering Count, which is pretty cool. And there's some other community science programs. I didn't talk about our Bumblebee program. So we have Bumblebee Watch, which is if it's sort of like iNat. So if you see a bumblebee, you can take a picture of it and put it on Bumblebee Watch, and then there's little cartoons that help you ID it, and then one of our Bumblebee staff confirms the ID. We also have the Bumblebee Atlas project where you have to do the training, but then you get to do it's really fun. So you spend 45 minutes collecting bumblebees. You put them in the cooler because it cools them down and they can't move. And then you take photos of them and then they warm up and fly away and they're fine. But it's really fun. So if any of you are interested in Bumblebee Alice, maybe email Alice and she can email or they can email me and then I can get you information on that. I'm in Natomas and I have created a pollinator garden with a community group. So I'm out there starting next week. We'll be out there on Thursdays, but we do a bumblebee survey there if any of you want to come out and see how we collect the bees. So if you're interested in that, we just go out and pull weeds once a week, but we do a bumblebee survey there. So there's that kind of thing. Sometimes people need help with plantings, but unfortunately, we don't have a ton of that type of volunteer thing. But if you are interested, let me know, or Atlas, they can email me a list of you guys and I can try and keep you posted.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Angela. I did put the link for the community science programs in the chat for anybody that's interested.
Right.
We do have to start wrapping up. So I just want to thank you so much for your time. Can we get some applause or some thank yous from the young climate champions?
Thanks for listening to me drone on about.
We're all very grateful. Yeah, this is a great learning opportunity.
Yeah, and I just see one more question. We are funded by a combination of grants and donations. So we have members who join, some different people give us donations, and then we get grants. We have a lot of federal grants, which we're worried about drying up. We have some grants from the state. The California kits are funded by state funding. We've had money from different foundations and organizations. We do a lot of fundraising to pay our staff and pay for all of the programs that we do. All right, yes, and Alice can give you my email if you have any other questions or want to follow up on anything. Thank you guys for being engaged and being part of this program. It's great.
Thank you so much, Angela.
Bye, everybody.
Young climate champions, please stay on because we have some admin things to talk about real quick. I am going to stop recording.